Good evening. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Pei Beis. We have a lot to cover because we're on Pei Aleph Amud Beis, halfway down at a Mishnah. And this Mishnah speaks about something called a get kereach or a get mekushar. And it is a get that was made with various folds. It was a specific get that was made for Kohanim. Kohanim were known for their sharper, more impulsive personalities. We were afraid that they were going to divorce their wives on a whim. So we created this very complicated get. You write a few sentences on one, then you'd fold a piece of paper, stitch it down, and then you'd have that piece of paper signed, that fold signed. Then you'd write a little bit more, create another fold, stitch it down, and sign v'chule v'chule. Then if it was missing a signature, it was then called a get kereach. So the Gemara says, if kansa, the Mishnah says halfway down on Pei Aleph on the Beis, if kansa beget kereach, if a person were to have gotten married, a woman got married based on a divorce, but the divorce was a get kereach, it was a get mekushar that was missing signatures. The halacha is teitze mizeh mizeh. She would then have to be removed from all marriages. V'chol hadrachan ha'eluba, and all the stringencies, the very sharp stringencies that we learned over the years, apply to her. And the Gemara then says, get kereach. Hakol mashlimin alav divrei Ben Nanas. Ben Nanas was of the opinion that anyone can sign for the open signatures. It could be a family member, it could be an eved, and it could be a gazlan. As we'll soon see, those are going to be the three people that we're going to be highlighting, those three categories of signatures. And Rabbi Akiva Omer, no, ein mashlimin alav ella. Only family members who, under other circumstances, are allowed to be normal edim. Here, they're allowed to fill in for a get kereach. However, a gazlan is not allowed and an eved is not allowed. We'll analyze this in the Gemara. Be'ezu get kereach. What is the definition of a get kereach, of a bald get, as it's literally translated? Kol shek sharav merubin me'edav. When the folds and therefore the stitchings of this long piece of paper that's folded and stitched down, when there are more folds in the paper than there are signatures, namely there's some missing signatures.
And this was only used for Kohanim. So
yeah, that's correct. These were used for Kohanim because they take a look at Rashi, 15 lines down at the open of the Mishnah, and a few lines into there. Amrinan de tikun rabbanon get mekushar mishum Kohanim kaptanim. It was specifically made for Kohanim who are known to have a shorter fuse. All right, the Gemara opens about 2/3 of the way down. My time of the get kereach. What is the reason why we were so strict about a get kereach? That for every time it was mekushar, that there also had to be a signature. So to that, the Gemara says gzeira mishum kulchem. We have a gzeira because perhaps the husband had said that he wanted everyone to sign or every fold to be signed, and we're missing one, and therefore perhaps the get is not kosher. The Gemara asks another question, speaking about our Mishnah, get kereach hakol mashleimin alav, that the Tanakama Ben Nanas was of the opinion that a get kereach, a bald get, could have anyone sign. We're right now on Pei Aleph Amud Beis, 2/3 of the way down, right at the open of the Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, Eved, my time alo. According to Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that only a karov, an immediate family member, would be able to be a signatory, but not everybody else. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, Eved my time alo. Why can't an Eved be a part of this? Because the Gemara says, to asu lememar kasher le'edus. Because if somebody sees that there's an Eved's name signed on there, they're like, wow, an Eved, this guy's kasher le'edus? You can't tell me that this guy's kasher le'edus. That makes no sense. Says the Gemara, okay, I understand why Rabbi Akiva might say that about an Eved, but why don't we have that concern about a karov too? Karov nami, asa lememar kasher le'edus. If I have my brother sign, if you see Phil Karesh on a document, who's the Baal Dover in a document, and Howard Karesh signs, that's a problem. That's a karov. So people might think that a karov is allowed. Says the Gemara, you're right. That can't be the reason. Ella, it must be that Evet Hainu Taima the Dilma Asula Asuke the Yuchsin. We're concerned that a person might assume that this person who's signing is connected b'yuchsin, that he's considered to be a miyuchas. Says the Gemara, okay, but a gazlan de bar yuchsin who lis kasher. But then a gazlan who is a bar yuchsin because he has an appropriate heritage, he has Yiddish parents, and he's not an eved. Maybe we would have said lis kasher, and that's not the case. Halama tanan. Our Mishnah says, Rabbi Akiva Omer mashlimin alav. So therefore, that can't be the reason either as to why the Eved has been excluded. And the Gemara gives its third and final answer. Ela Eved, what's the reason why an Eved can't be a signer on this get mekushar? Says the Gemara, Hainu Taima de Asu the Memar Shachrure Shachrure, because people might assume that if his name has been used, that he's actually been freed. I says the Gemara, Gazlan Nami, perhaps by a Gazlan, a person can see this person and they'll assume, just like we were concerned that if an Eved was signing, we might think he's free. To Gazlan Nami, also the Meimar Tshuva Avad. I Karov Ma'ikala Meimar. What about a Karov? Says the Gemara, the reason why a Karov is different is because Karov, Kule Alma Yade de Karovu. Everyone knows that the person's a Karov. They share a last name, they look alike. I've been mistaken for my siblings many times. Happens all the time. My brother went to go speak in Eretz Yisrael somewhere, and someone looked at him and said, "Oh my gosh, you're Phil Karesh's brother." We look alike. Everybody knows we're family. So when you have someone filling in on a get makushar, and it's the same family, they're like, yes, it's his brother. We understand, and therefore it's mutter. But by a Gazlan or an Eved, there is room for confusion. That's why, according to Rabbi Akiva, you're allowed to have krovim, but you're not allowed to have avadim and Gazlanim sign. And the Gemara says, Amar Reb Zera, Amar Rabba bar Shilta, Amar Reb Hamnuna Saba, Amar Reb Ada bar Ava. Get Kereach. How do we define this bald get? Says the Gemara, Ksharav Shiva ve'edav Shisha. If you have 7 edim and 6 signatures, Shisha ve'edav Chamisha, 6 ksharim, 6 folds of the paper and only 5 signatures. Chamisha ve'edav Arba. You have 5 folds of the paper and 4 signatures. Arba ve'edav Shlosha. In all of these cases, Ad kan machlokas ben Nanas v'Rebbi Akiva. That's when we have the machlokas of ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva as to whether or not we allow everyone to sign, which is the shita of ben Nanas, or if we only allow krovim to sign, which is the shita of Rabbi Akiva. Aval, had it been the case that it was ksharav shlosha ve'edim shnayim, had it been that there were only 3 folds of paper and there were only 2 signatures, then both Rabbi Akiva and ben Nanas, divrei hakol, ein mashlivin alav elakarov, there only a family member can sign. And Amalei Reb Zera l'Rabba bar Shilta, Michti, let's analyze this. Kol shlosha b'mekushar kishnayim b'pashatami. Whenever we have 3 people who are signing on a get mekushar, this unique get that's made for a kohen, that's the same halachic status of kishnayim as a get that has 2 signatures, b'pashatami, on a pashat, on a regular get. And what's the comparison? Says the Gemara. Mahasam karovlo, avhachanami karovlo. So Reb Zera says to Rabbi, I disagree with you. He says it must be the case that you should not be able to sign here. Amarle afladidi kashali. This was a question that I had raised myself. We're 8 or 9 lines from the bottom of Pei Aleph Amud Beis, and the Gemara says, this was a question for me. Ush ilte l'Rav Hamnuna. I asked this question to Rav Hamnuna. He didn't know the answer. Rav Hamnuna l'Rav Ada bar Ava. Leave the case of a get that is b'mekushar, a get that has these 3 folds and 2 signatures, because that case is not deoraisa. Remember that it was the Chachamim who instituted. It was the Chachamim that instituted that by a Kohen that we have to have a unique get in order to allow him some time to cool his mood, because he's a kaptan, because the Kohanim were whatever the right word is, short-tempered, short-fused, tenacious, again, whatever that's hard to describe because it doesn't really function that way now. Now we're uniquely branded. Everyone's short-tempered. You don't have to be a Kohen. You don't have to be everyone. It doesn't matter. So the Gemara says, therefore, Dalav Doraisa, you can't compare a get pashut, which is a regular get where it requires 2 people, and a get mekusha, which requires 3. And Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa says quite similarly. This is almost identical language to our Gemara. And this is a Tosefta here in this Masechta. And the Gemara says, get koreach. What's the definition of a get koreach, of a bald get? Says the Gemara, kshar of shiva ve'edav shisha, 7 folds of paper and 6 signatures, or shisha ve'edav chamisha, chamisha ve'edav arba, arba ve'edav shlosha, that it's basically 1 signature less than the number of folds in all of those cases, down to 4 folds and 3 signatures. It says the Gemara, just like our Gemara, and this is the raya that our Gemara is correct, is that ad kan machlokas ben Nanas Rabbi Akiva, and hishlam alav eved, if the eved were to then come in and sign, Ben Nanas Omer Havlad Kosher, because that's what we saw in our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah, the name of Ben Nanas says that Hakol, that everyone is allowed to be Mashlim, even an Eved, even a Gazlan. Rabbi Akiva Omer, in such a case, a Vlad Mamzer, that the Vlad would actually be a Mamzer if an Eved were to sign. Aval, that's only in those cases that we have the case of the Machlokes of Ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva. Aval, Ksharav Shlosha ve'edav Shnayim. If you have 3 folds in the get mekushar and there's only 2 signatures, dibra kol en mashlim and avela karov, and therefore we see as a beautiful raya for our Gemara, it's almost word for word that we can see that a get Kareach is where we have a bald get. It's multiple folds of paper, but one signature short. That's considered a get Kareach, and that is not valid. So Rav Yosef Masni says, wait 1 second. How can you say that there's any problem with this? We have one brisa that says kosher, and we have another brisa that says Vatanya Karov. How do we have no idea. We don't know if this Eved's allowed to do this signature. So says the Gemara, Amar Papa Tini Kosher, that when it says Karov, it actually means kosher. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yochanan, Amar Rav Yochanan, Lohuchsheru bo ella eid echad Karov bilvad. We only allow the signature when we do say that we allow. This is Rabbi Akiva Shita. When we do say that we allow one signature, what one signature is that? That's eid echad Karov bilvad. Only one signature of a karov on the get mekushar. Aval trelo, but it will not be two signatures. Because if there only are three signatures and two of them belong to krovim, that does not work, because then that's a psul in the get inherently, because you can't have it be that the core two signatures are krovim. Amar Rav Ashi, masnisa nami deka. This also reflects accurately in our Mishnah, as we can see on the top of Pei Beis Amud Aleph. And the Gemara says, the kamedalig b'tani chad chad shma mina, because we can see that we're talking about a case where the numbers go down one at a time, and therefore we see it doesn't go down two at a time. So what do we see according to Rabbi Akiva if it goes down one at a time? That only one karov is allowed to sign. Otherwise, we could have had variations on the brisa in the case before, where the cases didn't go from 6 folds and 5 signatures, and 5 folds and 4 signatures. It could have done 6 folds to 4 signatures. Elamai, it must be that Rabbi Akiva is right, that it's chad chad shma mina, that only one karov is allowed to sign. Amar Abaye, on the top of Pei Beis Amud Aleph, on the first and second lines, Abaye says, shma mina hai karov chasim. We don't care where he signs. It doesn't matter where the blank signature is. He's allowed to sign anywhere. Mimai. What's the raya that this karov is allowed to sign anywhere? So the Gemara says, because the Chachamim in our Mishnah and in the Brisa, they don't record a place where this karov is supposed to sign. That therefore implies that there is no specific place. That all three of them help to fulfill, but only one person is going to be a family member, and it doesn't have to be ritzufin. They don't have to sign the folds in order. If we needed the karov to sign in a specific place, then they should have told us that, and they didn't. And therefore, there's no specific spot that the karov needs to sign. And according to some, this is Rav Yanai, and not Rav Ami. And according to some, this is Rav Yochanan. In other words, we're not 100% sure historically who said this line. You're even allowed to use an Eved from the Shuk, which is a nod to the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. Let's review, because this can be a little bit confusing. Kohanim require a unique get called the get mekushar because they're kaptanim, and we're afraid that they're going to overly quickly, reactively divorce their wives. So they came up with this extremely laborious process of building a get, where you write part of a get, fold the paper, stitch it together. On every fold, you needed to have a signature. When you have a get mekushar that's lacking signatures, it's called a get kereach. Halacha l'maisa, if there's an opening for a signature, according to Ben Nanas in our Mishnah, he says that anyone can sign. And therefore, that includes even an Eved and even a Gazlan. And according to Rabbi Akiva, only a Karov can sign, and nobody else. That brings us to the end of the Parak Hadron Halacha Zorik Baruch Hashem. We finished the 8th Parak of Maseches Gittin. We are moving along nicely, and we're just about to finish this Masechta, Mirz Hashem, in another week or so, and that's going to be on Daf Tzadi, and that also means that this is the last Parak in the Masechta. Baruch Hashem, we're plugging along. This is our 19th Masechta in Shas. We're almost at the halfway mark, and Mirz Hashem, when we get to Rosh Hashanah time, right after Rosh Hashanah, we'll hit the halfway mark. Right now, we're about 1,310 blot in, something along those lines. Yiratzon, we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. The next Mishnah writes on Pei Beis Amud Aleph, a quarter of the way down, Hamagarish es ishto, if a man divorces his wife, but when he does so, he creates a stipulation, Ba'amar la, and he says to her, Harehat mutaris l'chol adam elo leploni. You're allowed to marry anyone you want, except for this one guy that I really hate. So how do we view that? do we say that that's still not, effectively krisus? You're still connected, or do we say that it's an effective get? This is a machlokes tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer matir, the chachamim osrim. Rabbi Eliezer says that they're divorced and she's good to go. She's muteris to marry. And the chachamim say osrim, no, not acceptable, not allowed. We're going to learn a lot more about this soon. So says the Gemara, Ketzad Yaseh, what then should they do if this doesn't work? Yidlena heimena, he should take the get back from her, v'yachzor v'yitnenala, and then he should again give it to her. V'yomar lo, and when he gives it to her the second time, he should say, Hare'at muteres l'chol adam. You can marry anyone without the condition. What if kasvu b'socho? What if he wrote the condition of, I want to divorce you, but you're not allowed to marry person X? What if he wrote it in? Even if he later went back and wrote and erased the names, that qualification of you need to get divorced, we need to get divorced, but you can't marry person X. Even if they erased it from the get, it doesn't matter. Puzzle. When we look at the initial case that was presented here, that he says, you're muteres l'chol adam ella leploni. How do we view the word ella? Is, as the Gemara recommends here, hi Ella, chutz, is it except for, meaning we're divorced except for person X? Oh, or perhaps is it almanasu, on the condition that you don't marry person X? Those are different things. The first one is building in, it's not a condition, it's just a fact. You are divorced except that you cannot marry person X. The other one is a condition which says we're only divorced if you don't marry person X. And that could create a very big problem down the road. So they're very different. And the Gemara starts to analyze this a little bit more. Do we say chutzu, that really it's just a built-in rule? Uva chutzu depligi rabbanon alei de Rabbi Lazar. And the machlokas Rabbi Lazar and the rabbanon is here in regards to chutz. And that means that when he says to her, we're divorced, but you can't marry person X, the Chachamim still say they're divorced, and the Chachamim argue. So that says the Gemara, the shiur lo beget. And the reason the Rabbanon argue on the Chachamim, the Rabbanon argue on Rabbi Eliezer, is because shiur lo beget. There's something left over in the get that wasn't done, which is that there still is a krisos here. Aval be'almanas, perhaps the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan doesn't apply to almanas, module, midi dehavia kol tanai da'alma, because as we've spoken about a number of times in this Masechta, the fact that a husband puts in a stipulation for a t'nai doesn't mean that the t'nai needs to be fulfilled. You may recall from many blot ago that if a husband says we are divorced on the condition almanas that you give me 200 zuz, the halacha is that they're divorced. She still has to fulfill the condition, but they're still divorced. So perhaps we'd say the same thing over here. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps the machlokas is exactly the opposite. Perhaps really almanasu, really our Mishnah, when it says you can marry anyone, ella ploni, maybe what it means is you're allowed to marry anyone. You're divorced on the condition that you don't marry ploni. So then, uba almanasu depalig Rabbi Lazar adar Rabbanon, that the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanon is under the assumption that the word ella in our Mishnah means almanas, that you are divorced on the condition that you don't marry person X. Aval bachutz, but had it been that the word bachutz here, that ella means bachutz, that it's just other than this person, then modeh, maybe everyone would agree that the get doesn't work to hashir la beget because something is left over in the get. Mm-hmm. So do we say that in the open of our Mishnah, when it says hareh mutaris l'chol adam ella leploni, is ella chutz or is ella almanas? So to this, the Gemara says, and we're halfway down on Pei Beis Amud Aleph, and we're invoking Ravina, Amar Ravina, Tashma, we have a brisa that functions as precedence, or at least a raya for our Mishnah. We're trying to figure out how the word Ella is being used. Does Ella mean except for this person, simple and glad, or does Ella mean almanas on the condition? So says the Gemara, Amar Ravina Tashma, we have a raya from the world of Negoim. Kol habatim, all homes, metamin bin Negoim, they are subject to the possibility of getting a nega. Ella shel ovdei kochavim. And here we need to know what the word Ella means. Does Ella mean chutz, except for, or does Ella mean almanas? Now, I could understand what this means. Meaning, in order for Negaim to be shaykh to you, you need to be a yid. And the house needs to belong to a yid. That makes perfect sense. Ella iamris almanasu. If you say that the usage of the word Ella by Negaim is almanas, then the way that the brisa would read is that all houses are metame ben Negaim on the condition that it doesn't happen by a goy. That's what the Gemara says. And almanas de lo mitmu bate of the kochavim hu de mitmu bate Yisrael. But if in fact mitmu bate of the kochavim, if the homes of the kochavim would become tamei, lo mitmei bate Yisrael, and that can't be the case because we know the Torah speaks about the goyim on a house. So it can't be that the word Ella here is almanas, that the only time that the Jews have Nagayim is when the Goyim don't have Nagayim. That can't be. So therefore, the word Ella must mean simply chutz and not almanas. And 3/4 of the way down in Ve'od, and furthermore, bate ovdei kochavim mi mitame. Could it ever be the case that the home of ovdei kochavim could ever become tamei ben Nagayim? V'hatanya, the Brisa writes, v'nosati negot zaras b'veis eretz achuzaschem. And the Brisa writes, based on the pasuk, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "And I will place a negat zaras in your home, in your achuza, in your place of inheritance. Eretz achuzaschem etame b'negayim. Only a land that was Yerusha, that was earned as an inheritance, is metame b'negayim. And therefore, ve'ein bate ovdei kochavim metame b'negayim. But that's not the case with the houses of ovdei kochavim. Ella shmamina chutzu shmamina." The Gemara therefore concludes that when our Mishnah uses the word Ella, just like its usage in regards to Nagayim, it means chutz and not almanas. There's no condition happening here. The husband is just saying, we are divorced and you cannot marry person X. And the Gemara says about 8 lines or so from the bottom of Pei Beis Amud Aleph that Masnisen de lo ki haitana. Our Mishnah, which clearly states Hareat muteres lechol adam ela leploni, and there's a machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim there. Our Mishnah is not like the following brisa. Titania, Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, lo nechlaku Rabbi Eliezer v'Chachamim al hamegarish es ishto v'amar la hareat muteres lechol adam chutz miploni she'en megureshes. It's the exact opposite of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that that's where we have a machlokas. This brisa says that's where there isn't a machlokas, but rather alman nechlaku, where then is a machlokas, if the language was specifically almanas, which is exactly the opposite of what we learned. Alman nechlaku, when do Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim argue? We're 2 lines from the bottom on Pei Beis Amud Aleph. Only al hamegarish es ishto v'amar la, quote, hareat muteres l'chol adam almanash lo tinasi leploni, on the condition that you don't marry person X. So that, says the Gemara, is clearly not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that the machlokas is where he said chutz or ella. But here, in this brisa, no, the only time that Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan's machlokas is recorded in this brisa is only with the language of almanas, turning to the top of Pei Beis Amud Beis. And we're going to head, Mirz Hashem, to the top of Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, about 9 lines down to the 2 dots there. What was the understanding of the brisa? That the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan was with almanas. Rabbi Eliezer matir l'chol adam chutz me'oso ha'ish v'chachamim osrim. That this is where they have their machlokas. Rabbi Eliezer says the divorce takes effect for everyone except for that one person, meaning she's not allowed to marry that one person. And the chachamim are osrim to say that the divorce doesn't work at all when there's almanas. And on the second line, the Gemara questions the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. Asks the Gemara, my time of Rabbi Eliezer. What is the reason as to why Rabbi Eliezer holds that this divorce actually works? Says the Gemara, the reason why this divorce actually works, when a person says, we are hereby divorced, almanas, that you don't marry person X, the answer is 3 lines down, midi dehavi akol tanai alma. These are just general loose conditions that the husband is throwing in. Maybe it's just to drive her crazy. Doesn't matter. The Tanaim don't ruin the fact that there's a divorce, and she still may have to do the condition, just like over here. The Rabbanan, according to the rabbis, when there's a condition of a get that's an almanas condition, that we are divorced on the condition that you don't marry person X, why doesn't that work? Because kol t'nai de alma lo shiur lo beget, but hacha shiur lo beget. In general, when the extra condition isn't integral to what you're doing, no problem. Then you're right. Then we say that there's a t'nai that we just don't care about. For example, if a husband says to a woman, you are hereby divorced on the condition that you pay me 200 zuz, then even the sheet of the Rabban and the Chachamim would agree there's a divorce. But here, the husband left something over in the divorce itself. It's not external. It's not we're divorced if you pay me 200. You're divorced as long as you don't marry person X. So because the condition was part and parcel of the divorce, right in the nucleus of the divorce, so therefore that doesn't work. Hacha shiur lo beget. And Umas Nisan, our Mishnah, where we had already said to Kimna Bachutz, our Mishnah, which was clearly talking about a case of chutz, where we established that we're talking about a person who said you are allowed to be divorced and you cannot marry person X. My time of Rabbi Eliezer. Why there did that work? So the Gemara says, again, we're answering up for our Mishnah. Why did Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah say the divorce works? Amar Rav Yanai mishum zaken echad. He said in the name of one great zaken. And the Gemara says, what did this great zaken say? Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'yatsa mi beiso v'halcha v'haisa li'ish acher, afilu lo hitira elo li'ish acher." Even if she was only allowed to marry one other person, the din is harezu migureshes. That's a very sharp raya for the sheets of Rabbi Eliezer. And therefore the Gemara says, wait 1 second. If that answer is so real, we have a pasuk in Chumash as to why Rabbi Eliezer is matir the divorce, why he allows the divorce to take place, then v'Rabbanan, how do the Rabbanan learn this pasuk? Because the Rabbanan say they're not divorced. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, his learning of this pasuk indicates, a drasha from the pasuk is that as long as there's one person she could in theory marry, then they're divorced. V'Rabbanan, hi ish, how do you understand this? Hi ish, l'chol ish v'ish. When it says ish, it doesn't mean one person, it just means all people. And therefore, you can't have a get that has a limitation that says you can only marry certain people. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan gives another approach in regards to Rabbi Eliezer. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no. In our Mishnah, when Rabbi Eliezer says, with the language of Ella, or chutz, that he says that they're divorced, what's the reason why they're divorced? Time of Rabbi Eliezer mehacha, it's a different pasuk. The pasuk reads, V'isha grusha mi isha lo yikachu, that when a woman gets divorced from her husband, lo yikachu, there cannot be a divorce, there cannot be another marriage. Afilu lo nisgarsha ela mi isha nifsala min hakahuna al mahavagita. Says the Gemara that even if she wouldn't have gotten divorced except only from her husband, and Rashi here highlights that, where's the Rashi? Rashi here highlights that in fact, this isn't stated in the Gemara, but if you look at Rashi on the second line, Rashi says, Elame Isha da Amar Allah, he says to her, Gureshes mimeni, v'i'at muteres l'chol adam. If that phrase were to have been said, that would have been a little bit much. But as long as one person's available, then they're able to get married. Al mahavagita. And what would the rabbis respond to Rabbi Yochanan's pasuk on behalf of Rabbi Eliezer? Isser kahuna shine. Yeah, apples and oranges. The cases of Kohanim are always different because Kohanim are kaptanim, they have unique Gittin. There's a lot unique about Kohanim. Now the Gemara turns the tables. And this is a little bit of a difficult Gemara. I struggled a lot with this and had to spend some time looking up, not a lot of time, because I found the answers pretty quickly in the back of the Masifta. And the answer is just shocking. But let's learn this case up. We're a third of the way down on Pei Beis and Mid Beis. The Gemara says, Boi Rabbi Abba b'kiddushin heach. What would be if we applied the same rules to the world of Kiddushin? What rules are we talking about? So take a look at Rashi. Rashi is 6 lines from the top of the page. B'kiddushin heach. And on the 7th line, Rashi says, what's the case? Where a man says to a woman, he's kadshi li, marry me, le asar l'chol adam, you are hereby forbidden to all people, chutz mi ploni, except that you're also allowed to get engaged to Ploni. Now, this, of course, is very difficult because a woman cannot be engaged or married to 2 men. And the reason why is because we won't know whose children she's having. Because if she's Mishamesh Mitasa with 2 people, we don't know who the father is. No genetic testing, none of that, and it doesn't matter. So the Gemara says, if we were to have had a similar language where one man says to a woman, you're hereby married to me, and you're not allowed to be married to anyone else except for Shimon, so what would the din be? And says the Gemara, as we try to bring in this question from the world of Gittin to the world of Kiddushin, the Gemara says we can ask this question to Tiboy Rabbi Eliezer and Tiboy Rabbanon. This question could be asked through the lens of Rabbi Eliezer, as well as through the lens of the Rabbanon. Tiboy Rabbi Eliezer, the question could be asked according to Rabbi Eliezer, who in our Mishnah was Matir. Maybe Adkan lo kam Rabbi Eliezer hacha by Gittin that it's lenient elamishum de ksivi kroy because we have psukim. Aval hasam by Kiddushin it's a kinyan ma'alya, but we need an exceptional kinyan, and perhaps it would not work in this language. O Dilma, or perhaps maybe we can say that v'yatza v'haisa, we have a hekesh between the world of Gittin and the world of Kiddushin, and therefore it should work. And tiboy l'Rabbanan, there's 2 sides to the Rabbanan as well. What are the 2 sides to the Rabbanan? Remember that in our Mishnah, the Rabbanan said that this divorce does not work when there's a condition built in like this, or when there's a chutz. But perhaps, says the Gemara, that ad kan lo ka'amri Rabbanan hacha ela deba'inan krisus v'leka. Maybe the world of Gittin is very different because the world of Gittin has a stringency, has a strict nature to it in regards to krisus. And there's no krisos if you say that you're not allowed to marry that other man. Aval Hasan by Kiddushin, perhaps we'd say Kinyan Koldu, that any Kinyan would work, and therefore it should work. Or Dilma, or perhaps perhaps we'd say that even within the Rabbanan, that there's a hekesh between Kiddushin and between the world of Gittin, and we would apply all of the same rules. It says the Gemara, Levasar de Ibayle, after Rabbi Abba posed the question, Hadar Pashta. He answered his own question, and what did he say? We're 2/3 of the way down. Bein the Rabbi Eliezer, bein the Rabbanon, Bo'inan v'yatza v'haisa. We do, in fact, make a comparison between the world of Gittin and the world of Kiddushin. And therefore, as Rashi highlights 1/3 of the way down, Dibur Hamaskel Hadar Pashta, Rashi says, Rabbi Lazar Havu Kiddushin, just like he said by Gittin, he would say by Kiddushin. And the Rabbanan Lo Havu Kiddushin, party lines, meaning we have a full equivalence between this kind of line that's stated by Kiddushin, just like we would have by Gittin. And just like by Gittin, there's a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer who's lenient with this exception that that you're divorced except that you can't marry person X. The same thing would be true by Kiddushin, that you're married, that we're married, and you're not allowed to marry anybody else except for person X. And the halachos stay the same according to both of them. Like Rabbi Eliezer? No, probably not, because he's a das yachid. It's Yachid Barab Malacha Karabim. We probably hold like the Rabbanan that this get would not work. Yeah, that's how the Rambam holds. If you look in the Mishnah at the open of the Parak on Pei Beis Amud Aleph, if you look at the Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch in Even HaEzer Siman Kuf Lamed Zayin, there it seems to be like the Chachamim, that if a person puts a stipulation in a get that you're hereby divorced except that you can't marry person X, the get is a 0. Doesn't count at all. We paskin like the Chachamim. We had to learn out both sides, but that is certainly how we paskin. And 2/3 of the way down, Abaye makes a comment. Amar Abaye, Im Tim Salomar Isa led the Rabbi Abba. If Rabbi Abba is right that we can extend this conditional divorce from the world of Gittin to the world of Kiddushin, then what if the following happened? Ba Ruvain v'Kitsha chutz mi Shimon. Ruvain goes over to Rachel and says, Harad mekudesh asli b'tabasu kudash Moshe v'Yisrael, and you're usher to all the men in the world except for Shimon. And then Uva Shimon v'Kitsha, then Shimon walks up to her and says, Harad mekudesh asli b'tabasu kudash Moshe v'Yisrael chutz mi Ruvain. And then Umesu Shneim, both brothers died. They both proposed to this woman, each excluding the other person, and then they both died. The halacha is misyabemes lelevi. If there's a third brother that's still alive, there is still yibum. Ve'enani koreba eshes shnei mesim. In Maseches Yevamos, we had learned about this idea. It's quoted here in this Masechta too, that if we have an Eshes Shnei Mesim, then there is no Yibum. That's not this case over here. So it says the Gemara, my taima. Why is our case where Ruvain proposes to Rachel and says you can marry anyone but Shimon, and Shimon does the same thing? My taima. Why is it that she is not considered an Eshes Shnei Mesim? Says the Gemara, because Kiddushay Ruvain ahanu, the first marriage with Ruvain worked, but Kiddushay the Shimon lo ahanu, the Kiddushim with Shimon didn't work. So says the Gemara, what then would be the case of Eshes Shnei Mesim? Ve'ela Eshes Shnei Mesim hechi mishkachas la. So the Gemara gives a crazy case. The Gemara says, Kigon sheba Ruvain v'Kitsha chutz mi Shimon. Ruvain goes over to Rachel and says, "Arad mekudeshesli b'tabazu kedas Moshe v'Yisrael chutz mi Shimon." You just can't you can marry other people. You just can't marry Shimon. Doesn't make any sense. You can't marry other people. This Gemara is very difficult, and I'll explain a little bit of a Rashba in a minute. And then Uva Shimon v'Kitsha stam. And then Shimon responds by proposing to Rachel, but without anything else other than a regular kiddushin. So here we say the kiddushay Ruvain. When Ruvain proposed to Rachel, so then ahanu l'meisra la'alma, that helped enough to forbid her to the rest of the world. The kiddushay de Shimon ahanu l'meisra are Ruvain, and the kiddushin of Shimon helped in regards to answering her on Ruvain. So this Gemara is very difficult. Once she received kiddushin from anyone, from Ruvain, how can she then receive kiddushin from another person? She's already married, and a woman can't marry twice. So the Rashba, which was quoted again in the back of the Masivta, writes that what we're talking about is, you're right, they're not both married at the same time, but the Kedushin has an impact from one person to the other. When Ruvain is Mekadesh Rachel, with the condition of Shimon, she restricts her from being with any other person in the world because she's engaged to Ruvain. And she says maybe Shimon, but obviously that doesn't work either because you can't be married to two people. And when Shimon comes in with his, it means that after Ruvain dies, there's a standing kedushin waiting in tow that would get them to be married. And 5-6 lines from the Gemara asks about 7 or 8 questions that will end in a teku, and that will be the end of our shiur tonight in just a moment or two. The Gemara says, Boy Rava, Omar La, Abai asks the question, if a man says to a woman, Hared muteres l'chol adam chutz me Ruvain v'Shimon, you're allowed to, we're getting divorced, you can marry anyone except for Ruvain v'Shimon, and then he changes his mind. V'chazar ba'amar la l'Ruvain v'Shimon, you are allowed to marry Ruvain and Shimon. Mahu, what do we assume about the husband's intentions? Mi amrinan ma'ida asar shara, that he used to be that just Ruvain and Shimon were asar, and he changed his mind about that, and now Ruvain and Shimon are allowed to be. O Dilma, or perhaps Maida Asar Shara, Maida Shara Asar. He's completely flipping his comments. So says the Gemara, we don't know the answer to that. But Im Tim Salomar, as we turn to the top of Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, Maida Asar Shara, if you want to say that Maida Asar Shara, that which he said about Ruvain and Shimon initially, that you cannot marry them, now he's saying Shara, that you can marry them, then what if the husband had only rescinded in regards to Ruvain? So initially he said, Harad miskaresh esli, but as long as you don't marry Ruvain and Shimon. And then he comes back and says, L'Reuven. He says, only Ruvain you're allowed to marry. Mahu, what do we assume about his comment about Ruvain? L'Reuven hu hadin l'Shimon, that really when he said Ruvain, he meant to include Shimon. Ruvain was just the beginning of the phrase. Odilma l'Reuven dafka, or perhaps she's only allowing him to marry Ruvain, but not Shimon. We don't know. And v'im tim salomar l'Reuven dafka, and if you want to say that Ruvain was dafka, then l'Shimon mahu. Then what if, when the husband tries to recant from saying that she cannot marry Ruvain and Shimon, and his retort was, I made a mistake, but l'Shimon, you can marry Shimon mahu. What do we assume? L'Shimon v'hu adin l'Reuven. Do we assume that when he says that you're now allowed to marry Shimon, you're also allowed to marry Ruvain? And this, where the reason why he only said Shimon's name is because it was the last name that he said. So when he corrected, he just went back to the last name he said. Oh, Dilma, the Shimon dafka, or perhaps Shimon was specific. And lastly, Boy Ravashi, what if the person said Afla Shimon hu, Mahu, even Shimon? What are the implications of even Shimon? Does that mean Af Ruvain Kai or Dilma Af Alma Kai, that even on Ruvain or even the entire world, maybe she can marry everyone at this point? We don't know the answer to that issue, to that question either. That's about 8 or 9 small questions, and the Gemara responds with Teku. We don't know the answers to all of these things. Just to review this last little sugya, if a man says to a woman, we're divorced on condition X, and then he recants those conditions, so there are a whole bunch of questions. Does your recanting have to be an exact quote of what you initially said? Can it be the first word or the last word? And to all of those questions, we say Teku. We'll stop right here. Mir Hashem will pick up tomorrow night in person. Wishing you all a beautiful night.